So these things go together. So when you understand the Buddha, you come closer to the Dhamma, and also you understand what the Dhamma actually means, and you get a more profound understanding of this whole thing. And that's why it is so useful to reflect on the Buddha himself. And there is again in the suttas, in the discourses of the Buddha, you find that the Buddha specifically said that one of the meditation techniques, one of the contemplations that are very useful for somebody who is a Buddhist is precisely to reflect on the qualities of the Buddha. And there's a list in the Pali which talks about all these qualities, that he is sort of is fully enlightened, that he understands the world and all these kind of things. I'm not going to talk about that list, but the list is there because when you reflect on the Buddha and you get that inspiration, you find that your confused mind, your unclear mind gets clarified, and you find this peace inside of you. And that makes it possible to meditate, it makes it possible to act with more kindness and more compassion in the world when you have that peace inside of you. So it is actually a central part of the Buddhist practice as well, to reflect on the Buddha and his qualities. Now, one of the problems that I have found in my life reflecting on the Buddha is that there's all these barriers between us and the Buddha. It's actually not that easy to come to an understanding of who the Buddha was. And some of those barriers are probably very obvious, and some of them are not so obvious. But one of the barriers which I found, certainly at the beginning when I became interested in the Buddhist practice, I wasn't maybe even a Buddhist yet, was a sense that the Buddha is so far away. 2,500 years ago. It seems so long ago. It seemed like there's an enormous time gap between us and him. So how can we relate to somebody who lived 2,500 years ago? Sometimes when you read something that happened 100 years ago, like the First World War, or if you go maybe 200 years back to the time when Australia was founded, and in Europe you had like Napoleon, Napoleonic wars and all these kind of things. You look at people in those days, you wonder, even in those days, they look completely different from us. They seem to behave in strange ways, and it's very hard to imagine even living in those days. That's only 200 years ago, but he was talking about 2,500 years ago. So it's strange. We wonder, how can we relate to something so far back?